I'm Lisa Rene Debenedictis, and I'm privileged to be here on the Cleveland State campus reading my new book, Short Skirts and Shorter Stories. I'm going to read one called Adolescent Love Lost. These are all biographical stories. My first 3 boyfriends died. I know that makes me sound like an unlucky penny, but I was irrelevant to the circumstances. They were involved in terrible accidents. Danny, a childhood friend, was struck by a train while trying to rescue a wayward puppy while on a walk with his brother. Hunter Yawn was new to our school. He had moved from upstate New York, if memory serves. Hunter was the epitome of middle school cool. He had chin-length, shiny black hair. Hunter told people he was part Cherokee Indian. I still don't know if this was true, but it was part of his lore. Hunter was bright and artistic, and all the girls kind of held their breath when he was around. He read some of my 7th grade poetry and my earliest attempt at a Canterbury Tale with Ernest. I couldn't believe he actually spoke to me because he was a grade older and much cooler than me. I was a nerdy girl who spent most of her time in libraries or volunteering with mentally handicapped children and adults. I hung out a lot with my mom. I had neighborhood pals and some friends, but I preferred books. I listened to jazz and classical music. I was, at least in my mind, the poster child for all things uncool. The second time he talked to me, he handed me a present. It was a handmade leather bracelet. It was beautiful. He tied it around my scrawny wrist. He had carved little blue flowers strung together with green tooled leaves. I blinked back tears of appreciation as his lips nuzzled the top of my head. I would wait around for him after school. I would drag my German Shepherd for walks near his house to catch a glimpse of his bike. He had a sister in college somewhere in New York, and his dad traveled a lot, so he would take long bike rides, and I would see his mom in the garden and through a kitchen window. She was cheery and had a gentle smile. I talked about him constantly at the dinner table. My irritated dad would roll his eyes dismissively and ask if I was learning anything at that school. My mom was kinder and asked what part of New York he was from. She encouraged me to ask him to dollar movie night and to come over for cookies and ice cream. We never got around to either. One early spring Saturday morning, I got a horrifying call that he had been hit by a car while riding his bike. I screamed and dropped the phone. My mom told me to calm down. My dad turned on the radio and heard it on the news. We called the hospital and they reported he was in critical condition. 3 days later, after I had arranged for the 7th and 8th grade pep rally girls to create get well cards, my mom told me to pick up some flowers and drove me to Children's Hospital. I lugged in a large grocery bag filled to the well with well wishes, along with a recorded song I had composed on my cassette player. I wore my new maxi dress. I was astonished upon seeing him. He was attached to monitors and a ventilator. He was bruised and swollen and was paralyzed from the neck down. He wasn't able to speak, but he could understand everything. He blinked his eyes to display comprehension. His mother looked exhausted and flustered. I would get to know her and the nurses on her floor very well. I visited Hunter at least 2 or 3 times a week for the remainder of his life, a little over 3.5 years. There were some days when he would drift in and out of comas, and I would sit and read to him or just talk to his mom, and she would sew or knit presents for his around-the-clock nurses and aides. Most days, though, he was awake. The hospital devised a way for him to communicate by using a plexiglass board with vowels and consonants placed so that he could move his eyes strategically and spell out responses. Even in that terrible physical condition, he kept a wry sense of humor. He would cry when he was in pain and show dispiritedness when he was misunderstood. His mother's courage, patience, and stoicism left an indelible imprint that will stay with me throughout my life. My mother is a pretty strong woman, and I would watch her try to hold back tears for Hunter. She tried to be a confidant for his mom. Hunter's dad and mom divorced during the hospital stay. I was told they had planned to do this before his accident. I only met his father once. His sister's visits became less and less frequent. My mother admonished me and told me not to judge. Some people just don't handle things in the same way. I watched Hunter go through puberty in that lamented shape. His body would be turned and his bed sores salved. His nurse's mom and I shared a silent, clenched bond. I remember people shaking their heads and talking about something I didn't quite understand called euthanasia. Hunter's mother wouldn't hear of it. Hunter still had a quality of life mentally. His body suffered. He nearly died 2 or 3 times of pneumonia, but he wasn't ready to go. I grew up pretty fast during the course of those years. I continued doing schoolwork, more and more pro bono work with physically and mentally disabled toddlers and teens. I worked part-time jobs. I called my mom every day during my lunch hour, and if I couldn't come home, I lost another schoolgirl crush to a neighborhood friend named Anthony. He was my best friend Rosie's brother. Anthony was an artist who was a gifted amateur wrestler and a very competent swimmer. One August evening, he hit his head playing tag with some friends and his brother on a dock and drowned, effervescent and laughing midday, and left lifeless before dusk. All during the course of Hunter's prolonged hospitalization, I never took off the bracelet he had made me. I showered with it and wore it to sleep. It grew forlorn-looking and torn. One day the leather strings that held it on disintegrated and it fell to the floor. Sadly, I picked it up and mentioned something about trying to fix it as I got ready for school. 2 days later, when I called my mom right after criminal justice class, she told me Hunter had died in a coma that morning. The first thing she said was, "Now don't think it had anything to do with taking that bracelet off." I sucked in air, lips trembling. Was his mom with him? Yes, of course. There isn't going to be much of a memorial. I think she lost her house to all of the hospital bills. I don't think Hunter felt a lot of pain in the end. I have never said goodbye to an acquaintance, family, or friend in a light-hearted way since his passing. I have endeavored to live a life that is filled with adventure and to make every single second count. I am neither a legal expert on the mercifulness of euthanasia nor a medical ethicist, but I believe that life is very precious and loved ones hold on to each other for as long as they can. I grew up, traveled, venturing very far from the nest, but wherever I was, I called my mom every single day at least once. I have loved and lost and tried to remember the magnificence of daily existence. I try to live kindly and courageously. I suppose it must have been trying at times to be my progeny. I've held on to them and to all those I cherish for dear life. My name is Lisa Debenedictis, and I'm reading Short Skirts and Shorter Stories as invited by the gracious hosts of the Vindicator.